Welcome to the latest episode of High Stakes. I'm Paige Soya, managing partner of K Street Capital. And today we have James Barila with us, who's a longtime friend and, over a decade of experience in venture at this point. And today's topic is going to be what's hard and not fun about working in venture capital. And also there's going to be a second piece to this, which is talking about the DC ground game where politics intersect with tech and venture capital. But we'll talk about that later. But before we get started, James, why don't we start by having you introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your background?
Sure. First, thanks for having me. Thanks for the work that you do. It's been awesome getting to know you, considering you a friend, and seeing K Street really flourish and also be an accelerant for what's happening in DC. So I'm super grateful for that. Let's see. My background is I am a DC kid through and through. I grew up here. For the past almost 10 years, I've been cosplaying as a venture investor. I previously worked at Revolution for almost 5 years on the Rise of the Rest team, investing in pre-seed and seed stage companies all across the United States, but outside San Francisco, New York City, and Boston. Before that, cut my teeth at Greenspring Associates, doing fund-to-funds investing and growth equity, primarily enterprise software investing. But it all really starts growing up. My dad was an entrepreneur, started a renewable energy company, 15 years before it was cool. And I think being around DC and being raised in the family that I was raised in, we were always a little bit of outsiders in this city of political operatives and insiders. And so I'd always been drawn to problem solvers, to folks that didn't necessarily fit in or fit the mold. And that ultimately brought me to where everything started, which was at 1776. So that was called that the original DC tech incubator, accelerator, co-working space. And I interned there, and that totally catalyzed my career, and everything snowballed after that. And now I almost feel like Station DC is a little full circle, and we're trying to bring back a little bit of the juice that we had 10, 15 years ago in the city.
Yeah, that's so cool. And James, I know we've known each other for, 5 years, something like that?
Yeah.
But I didn't really know that you were at 1776 until just today. So that is it actually is full circle. I think what Station DC is doing is the next genesis of that, which is super cool. But anyway, thanks for being here. I think this will be a great, really interesting topic for people, especially because you were at multiple VC firms and you've worked in VC for a while on the investment side. And I think when people think about venture, they think of it as it's very romanticized, and in reality, there's a lot of parts of the job that I think if someone's out there, part of our audience is people who want to get into VC or are new to VC investing, and I think part of the point of the topic is that there's a lot more in venture that is difficult and not as fun and not as romanticized as just doing the deals, and I want to talk about what some of those aspects really are. Yeah. So I have some perspectives, but I would love to hear yours first.
Yeah, I think as a venture investor, there's 5 core responsibilities that every venture investor has. And based on your role and the type of firm that you're at, the percentages or how you allocate your time across all 5 of these responsibilities varies. But there's sourcing, selecting, supporting, fundraising, and then fund operations. I think those are the 5. And again, it depends on the type of firm. It depends on your role within the firm. But I would imagine that on any given day, you're doing at least one of those 5 things, if not many of those 5 things. And yes, venture has become this really sought after, cool, romanticized, sexy thing. And I actually do think it was the best job in the world. It was super cool. We were almost these
I agree.
Professional confidence inspirers. I don't really know if that's right. We're basically professional question askers and truth seekers, and you got to deeply understand people and markets and have to truly be a systems thinker. And then ultimately, I think what I loved about it, and this maybe draws on my lived experience and personal experience, is you're taking a bet on real people. And I think you're taking a bet on real people, but also hopefully you're making them feel confident and supported to go solve and do something of consequence, which I loved because it I almost feel that was a tip of my cap to my mom, which is, I think she always made me feel supported and confident and comfortable and inspired. And I'm okay, cool. This job is almost a way for me to professionalize that, as well as being an optimist and always thinking about what the future could look like and how the world could be better, faster, more efficient, and ultimately, hopefully, like a happier, more joyful place. But yes, like it's actually really hard, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of work that you're doing that's not super sexy, and like posting online and being on podcasts. Yeah, that's the fun stuff, but ultimately, like you have to be identifying like world-class talent that are solving problems that could potentially be super consequential. And like in reality, there's only a handful of those types of companies that get founded every year. So it's super, super competitive.
Yeah, exactly. I love the shout out to your mom, by the way, James.
Mm-hmm.
You're the best. That's awesome. And I do agree with you. It is that I love my job. I think it is the best job in the world. And so I guess there is something there to that romanticized narrative around venture capital. But I think the idea of this season of the podcast is to really shine a light on the things that people outside of the industry don't know about it. And I think there's a lot of parts to being a good VC or being a good investor that are really tough, and maybe not for you. If you're like someone listening to this episode and you hear some of these things and these aren't things that you would be comfortable doing, then maybe it's not the right career path. But so like just a few that I wanted to touch on is, this is a big one. I think that people don't realize how important fundraising is in venture capital. Like for if you are a VC, you have to fundraise yourself and raise money from LPs to be able to put money into the deals. And that doesn't end when you close your fund. Like I think people think that if they can just raise one thing and then it'll be easier after that. But I don't think it's ever actually a lot easier. I think it's very much an active effort that has to be a core part of your role if you want to be successful over the long run in venture, like building an enduring firm. And I think people think that's something they can outsource or I don't really believe that. I think you have to have that, embody that yourself. Even if you're not the primary fundraiser in the company, you have to be part of that process, or you will have to be part of that process if you want to evolve in your career in venture. So I don't know and James, I don't know, remind me, like how much of your role was in the fundraising aspect of the companies you worked in?
Honestly, like in my career, like not much, but I was involved, and you're like a professional fundraiser at the end of the day. Like you got to keep the lights on one way or another. And I think fundraising is like effort meets storytelling meets performance. And like it's not, you need to have all three of those things working at the same time in your favor. Like you need to be a wonderful storyteller and also like emotionally intelligent and be able to read the room and read people and understand people. It also is just, it takes relentless and sustained effort over a significant period of time, arguably like indefinitely, like always building new relationships, always focusing on your existing relationships. And it's a privilege to be a capital allocator and take someone else's dollars and to invest them on their behalf. And so making sure that you're doing what you can to like be a true steward of those dollars and of their capital and time and resources. And then end of the day, like nothing's going to work if you don't have the performance to show for it. And I think all three of those aspects need to be working at your favor at the same time. And also one thing I've learned is there's always a reason why you couldn't be fundraising. There's no such thing as a perfect fundraising environment. There's always something that's going on. There's always some degree of uncertainty or some news or something happening internally where it might feel like it's not the right time. But that's why the relentless and sustained effort is important. Like you just have to chip away every day and either be building top of funnel or servicing your existing relationships or building net new relationships. It's like a constant part of the role.
Yeah, I hear a lot of new fund managers say that they were going to raise a fund, but then they couldn't because of XYZ, right? Whatever thing was happening in the market. And I'm like, that's never going to change. That's not the reason. There's something else that's underlying your ability to fundraise, not just that. Because you're right. It's a lifelong skill and it's a muscle. You have to keep working at it or it deteriorates.
Yeah, it's funny. I think as a venture investor, I'm now just like thinking about this out loud. There's just like a lot of no that happens. Like you're effectively professionally wrong. I'm not sure what other career exists, other non-investing career that exists where you could pretty much be wrong like 80% of the time, if not more. The difference is when you're right, you need to be like really right and correct. But for the most part, like you have to have kind of a thick stomach or a strong stomach because the decisions that you're making And I think there's only a handful of decisions that you're making every year that are like truly consequential, which is one of the biggest differences that I've observed between starting and building something and being a venture investor is just like the pace and frequency in which you're making like consequential decisions. Like you can make, I don't know, 5 to 7 decisions of consequence every year as a venture investor. And you're probably going to be wrong about 5 to 7 of those, like some degree of that. And that's like on the, like you doing your job and like being like a capital allocator. And then on the other side of the market is like you're fundraising and you're just getting told no, like very consistently. So you're sitting in there's this weird dichotomy of like you just being in the middle of saying no and then hearing no constantly. And I don't know, it's weird. I guess now that I think about it, like it's hard to remain an optimist when you're like, you have to be, like there's like a lot of potential pessimism, but I don't know, I guess perspective is important.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way before, but now that you say it out loud, it's true. It is like a no echo chamber all around, right? It is. It is that, and it's hard to get to a yes, but I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about too is just the returns, right? Like when you are, especially an early stage venture, you're investing at an early stage, so it's a long time before those companies you even know whether they're going to perform or not. They have lots of ups and downs in that journey before they exit or don't exit or they go out of business. But so you don't really know, like you don't really know until the very end. But then you're still running a firm that whole time. So you have to continue to raise money, raise subsequent funds, and to be able to continue investing beyond your investment period. And so you really have to figure out how to deal with that uncertainty and the narrative around it. And also like you start to see companies go bankrupt first, usually. Honestly, like that's what happens. You see some of them, you make 10 investments in a fund and you already are seeing 2 or 3 of them that have died and you have 7 left that you don't know which one. Hopefully one of them is going to be a big winner, 2 maybe, but you don't know yet. And you're just faced with the no's. You're just faced with the failures and trying to, I guess, just live with that and have the confidence to know that the other bets you made were good and that you have more bets to go from there. I think that's not everyone likes that level of, I don't know, uncertainty. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's patience. Like it's a 10 to 15 year cycle occasionally. And like, of course, I feel like I'm just like speaking into like typical, I don't know, heuristics. You have to have independent conviction and like it's important to be able to have like your own developed unique insight. And I don't know, it's like, it's easy to get lost in like the near term dopamine hits when sometimes, I mean, I think the most valuable companies and investments that even I've been a part of, like they seemed like almost like sometimes ridiculous initially. And even in the first like 2 to 3 years, ideally there's like a handful of hypotheses that they're testing. And like with every turn of the cards, you get more data and the data supports the fact that this could be a really big and really valuable business. And most people don't see that initially. So you just have to have the stomach and the patience to stick by the founders that you make the initial and place your bet on.
I completely agree. And I wonder what you would think about this too. I feel like when you are looking at new deals and you're talking to a company for the first time as a VC, which this is spice of life, right? This is the thing we all love and this is why we do it. But a lot of times it's not like you're sitting in great new company meetings all day long. Like most of them aren't that great actually. And you can figure that out pretty quickly when you're talking, like when you are a professional VC and you've been doing it for a while, you've had a lot of these calls, you can get from the signal to noise very quickly, or the noise to signal very quickly in these kind of calls. And I think but you're still on the call, right? Like you still need to dig in for the rest of the call and make sure you're not missing something and whatever, but it may not be that exciting of an opportunity, right? And I think like people don't realize it's not like every opportunity is an exciting opportunity, but you're sitting through that, waiting for that moment of that aha moment of, wow, this is something really special. And you just have to it's like gem hunting through those meetings after a while, but you just have to keep doing it. And I guess, yeah, patience is the thing, to just look at lots of deals and find the best ones in the mix.
Yeah. And if you're doing your job well, you're looking for, yes, the needle in the haystack, but that could be like an individual that is like top 1 or 0.1% at one thing. And so they're just like so unique and have some natural advantage at something. It takes time, but it's totally like, I think I always found it being as an investor, it was just a privilege to be able to like surround myself with founders that had these crazy ambition, that were risking everything, that were placing all of their eggs in one basket. And I don't know, it always felt, I don't know, I was almost like honored in some ways to be able to spend my time with founders. And it's not totally dissimilar to how we think about now at Station DC with like our members or our prospective members and our corporate partners or prospective corporate partners. Like, it's really cool that they would be considering giving us their like time, dollars, resources, networks, whatever it is, and like investing that in us. And so I try to take a similar, or we try to take a similar approach to, I guess, like always leading like with gratitude. And it definitely is a privilege to be able to support our members and our partners. And similarly, as a VC, we always try to like lead with that mindset, which is, no, they're doing like really hard work and putting everything they have on the line. Like, we should just like be appreciative of the fact like people like this exist. And like, they're the reason that like America is how America is. I don't know. But yes, it's definitely needle in a haystack hunting.
Yeah, it is. It's like, I think sometimes you get something right away and it's very clear and you're excited about it, and then other times that's not what happens in one of those meetings.
Yeah.
But that's part of your job, is to figure out if there's something in there. That is part of the job, even if it's not upfront and obvious in the first few minutes. And even though it might never be obvious, and maybe it's not a good deal, and that's the end of the call and whatever, but that is a big part of the role, is trying to suss that out. So give the respect to the founder, because to your point, they're the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that are going to make the world go round. So we care more about founders, I think, than any other stakeholder we have. Yeah. And it's super important. So I was also going to ask you, is there anything that you dislike about the culture or incentives of the broader VC industry?
Yes.
Good question, right?
Yeah, wow. I'm trying to figure out how fiery I should be here. It's not about us. Like, venture investing isn't about us. One thing that I've really noticed in the past 6 months, since all I ever do and think about now is like Station DC and like building this, is like so much of the content that venture investors put out now, as someone that is like operating something, is totally irrelevant to me. And actually, when you like look at it, a lot of the venture investing content is like for themselves. And I'm like, that's interesting. But I mean, the whole like Twitter sphere is like funny if you think about it with a little bit of humility. There's a lot of cringe, that's for sure. And yeah, there's cringe, there's personality, there's potentially ego here and there, but it is like such a unique world. But I do think that there's pockets of genuinely like good people who, and I'm not saying that feels like a generalization of like all VCs are bad people. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But like, you just have to find your people and find your pockets. And like, I also think that like, you can totally be a successful investor just as like an independent, like as an individual, not even necessarily part of a team. And I don't know, I think maybe there are times in my career where I've just felt like an independent contributor, which was fine. That was actually like pretty fun. Like, I could just like go think about how I thought the world was going to work and get really like deep and philosophical and meta with it, and then throw a couple ideas out into the world and then go try to figure out how to meet with founders that were like solving those problems or like thought about the world similarly to how I did. But yeah, culture is, I don't know, it's like a little funky and different. I'm a nerd, but there's a lot of nerds, so I feel like it's in some ways my people. But I just think that like the venture content is like hysterically, it's definitely like a barbell, where there's some of it is like super interesting and like funny and entertaining. On the total other side of the bell curve is like actually insightful and thoughtful like pieces where there's value, and then the majority of it is just like irrelevant slop. Yeah,
I would completely agree. Yes, definitely. And hopefully the point of our podcast is really to shed a light on the things that most people outside the industry don't know. If you're not a venture investor or an angel investor or a founder, but you don't.
Yeah, cut through the noise.
Cut through the noise. This is a really opaque world, and you see all this content that, to your point, is like, what is it? I don't even know. But what's the reality of how it really works, and like how it's supposed to work, right?
Can I shout someone out?
Yeah,
okay, so one of our board members, his name is Jake Poliskin. He has a venture firm called Shorewind Capital. they invest in, I'm probably going to butcher this, but think about like foundational industries, like very deep tech type things, kind of like earlier stage. He like literally goes to libraries and like reads textbooks and goes to like conferences of academics and spends times with like academics and like folks at like ARPA-E, whereas like everyone in, or a lot of folks in venture are going to a defense investing conference where it's like the usual suspects. And like, I've told this explicitly to him. I'm like, dude, this is why you can like capture alpha, because there's no one way to succeed. And he's doing it totally differently. And so I just have a ton of respect. And he's also, I think, probably like the best venture investor that I've ever met and know. I think a lot of the general advice that I at least heard was like off the shelf, build a brand and build a Twitter presence. So that you need to have some reputation as someone that knows one thing about one thing. And it's actually now there's a bunch of different ways to do it. So I've always admired the fact that that's how Jake seems to operate. And he's been able to attract like world-class founders because he deeply understands things.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. Yeah, it's a really good point. I guess I was also going to ask you this last question on this topic, then I kind of want to talk about the DC ground game and like a little bit about the stuff you're doing at Station DC. But if you could eliminate one part of the VC role job, like when you were there in it, what would it be?
Probably like the fund operations stuff,
Yeah.
like writing quarterly reports. And again, like it's a privilege to do that because you're like serving your LPs and your investors, but I don't know. I don't think anyone is ever like super jazzed to write a quarterly report or coordinate with, figure out like fund admin things. Like that's just a little bit of a bummer. And I feel like there's always like a data collection piece to it too, which is just like always like pulling teeth no matter the process that you develop. And VCs like run a business. I think that sometimes gets lost. Like, yes, you're a capital allocator, but like you also, there's a team that you build, there's a culture that you're building, there is like actual like operational things that you are doing on a daily basis that like aren't terribly exciting, just coordinating with like your counsel and law firm and whoever it is. If you could just eliminate that and like just focus on sourcing, selecting, and supporting, and I guess fundraising, that'd be pretty awesome.
Yes, I would agree with that. But I do think that it is important, like, to your point, it's a firm, like it's a business, and you have to deal with all aspects of that. Insurance, right?
Yeah.
Travel, like office management stuff, right? IT.
Yes. That's like the stuff that is just, there's, I don't know, the 4 quadrants. There's like the, whatever, circle of excellence, circle of genius, circle of competence, circle of incompetence. Like, I'm definitely circle of incompetence of booking flights and hotels and like all of the small logistics things. It's just like that feels like such work to me.
Yeah, me too. But it's all part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to switch over to talk about the DC ground game a little bit and just hear your perspective on it. For our audience, obviously we're based in Washington, DC, and almost every major VC firm has some presence here, a very good reason. And so anyway, I guess I'll let you kick off this topic, James, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I guess maybe just set the table for what Station DC is and like what we're doing and maybe why we're doing it and maybe even how we do it. Like Station DC is a nonprofit members club for technologists, investors, and policymakers that are advancing American national interests. Why we're doing that is to make DC the heartbeat of American tech dominance. How we do that is we make introductions that matter. And so we're always bringing in, it's about 8 key stakeholder groups in any convening that we are doing. And those are founders and technologists, VCs, policymakers, military leaders, industry executives, philanthropists, academia, media, and I think that's 8 that I just named. But in any convening that we're doing, there's always at least 2 of those groups represented, because as we think about solving problems of consequence and problems like of national purpose, no one of those groups is going to do that alone. There really needs to be like deep unity and alignment and education and understanding and partnership among all 8 of those stakeholders and our purpose as an organization. And then what we do is we have a physical club, the clubhouse that we're building in Union Market, much more Soho house than WeWork. So think Americana, speakeasy style vibe, tufted leather couches, lounge chairs. We have a bar. We have three boardrooms. We have 5 small huddle rooms, a stage, a 16-foot LED screen that we're building. So we have our space, which will serve as the physical center of gravity and nexus of tech and policy in Washington, D.C. We host our own events. So we host quarterly 500-person summits. We host 25-person invite-only policy roundtable dinners, everything in between, private briefings, cocktail hours, networking events, etc. And then we provide education and intelligence. And we hope that by way of doing all of that, we're building this super elite network of decision makers and problem solvers that are serious people solving serious problems. And we can become this home for tech and innovation and global competitiveness in DC to really secure America's future. And I think if you actually take a step back and look at what we're doing, we are almost, in a lot of what we're doing, we thought about the city similarly to how like companies get started. And we're like, let's just figure out what our unique insight is here and what the city's competitive advantage is here, and then try to exploit that competitive advantage so that it can be used, or so that it can accrue to the benefit of the frontier innovators and folks that are really solving these problems. And for Washington, D.C., that's power, that's influence, that's like networks. We have the biggest customer in the entire world in the federal government here. We have all of its agencies. We have embassies. We have Fortune 500s. We have universities. And what DC does best is like we make decisions, and I laugh because sometimes the decisions don't get made quickly, but we make decisions that shape the future. But for far too long, innovators have not actually had access to those rooms of power where those decisions get made. But in order to secure America's future and remain the most technologically advanced, most innovative country in the entire world, which has ripple effects to like the largest and strongest economy in the world and the largest and strongest military in the world, like innovators need that access. And so that's what we're doing. We're like pulling up a chair for innovators in those rooms, and those rooms where it happens. We're curating those rooms where it happens. And I think our hope and our intent is that if successful, not only is it great for the country and the world and the West, but also we are catalyzing economic resilience, economic opportunity, and creating a more dynamic and more proud Washington, D.C. and district and almost region, which is like deeply important to me, seeing as I grew up here and I love this place. I want to live here for the rest of my life. It's the most powerful, most important city in the world. And like, yes, we're swamp people, but like we're resilient swamp people.
100%. Yep. Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's great. I'm glad you gave an overview of Station DC because by the way, full transparency, I'm a member of Station DC. I love it. I think it's great. It's in Union Market, which is probably the coolest part of DC, in my opinion, right now. Mm-hmm. So it's just it's like a great meeting of the minds spot for founders and new ideas and new disruptive technology. It just couldn't be better. So I think it's huge. But what advice would you have for founders who are trying to play the DC ground game? Like, how do you do it? Like, us in DC lifers maybe know a little bit more about this, but even if you're not in politics, but everybody else, it's like a very closed thing. And why does it matter? What should they be doing at the early stages of their companies when they're thinking about this kind of thing?
Yeah. So my hope is that this doesn't just sound like a Station DC commercial, but it might a little bit. Like, I think proximity is power, and there is an advantage in physically just being like present in the room consistently and organically. And as you think about like talent density and network effects, like just being around the right people, like you're not entirely sure, like information travels very fast in like physical spaces. And especially now when like decisions are happening very quickly and there's new information almost on a minute by minute basis, like physically being around Washington, D.C. and like spending time with policymakers and staffers, and it could be like legislative assistants or professional staff members or national security advisors or legislative directors or chief of staff or like program managers, just like being around them and like hearing what's happening. Ultimately, if you're actually listening, there's probably some like important nuggets in the conversations that you're having, and then you can use that to your advantage. So I think my number one piece of advice is if you're innovating in technology and in any frontier industry, ultimately to unlock true scale and distribution, you're probably going to have to start to spend time in Washington, D.C. and ultimately over time will probably be shaping policy, and not just shaping policy, but shaping RFPs and using the procurement cycle to your advantage. And like, how do you do that? You build relationships. Like, where do you build relationships? You build relationships in Washington, D.C. My strongly held belief is that the next wave of generational defining companies are going to be institutionally fluent and not necessarily anti-institutional. So that's like piece of advice number one, which is spend time here. And then I think piece of advice number two is frame your problem in some instances, and I actually think this is maybe more applicable to local government than federal government, but solve a political and operational problem. Like figure out what the pain points are of whoever it is that you're speaking with, and align your interests and outcomes with what it is that they are solving. And then also, I guess the third piece of advice is just build allies within the government. And again, like, how do you do all of that? You're physically spending time here, you're networking, you're building like real human to human relationships, and then gathering unique insights that you can use to your advantage.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And for what it's worth, I mean, I think most people know this, but we invest across the country at K Street. So we have companies in a lot of different states. A lot of them are in DC. Probably 40% of them are. But we invest outside of DC, and every single one of our portfolio companies outside of DC comes into DC at least twice a year for various things, because they're thinking about this, like the DC ground game, like being here in person and meeting with people in person is just the way it works in DC. I think if you're not here, you're not going to get a Zoom call with certain people. It's just not going to happen. But then it's also like they're coming in and testifying before Congress for certain things that they want to change, right? Or that they think are important, or that will shape the direction of policy that will ultimately impact them and their companies. And so I think just being aware of those things and thinking about it strategically as a company, when you should be here, who you should meet with, like it's a long game and it takes a long time to build those relationships, but they ultimately do impact business. And even if you're not in a regulated market, I think that's the other thing too. Like companies that are not in a regulated, almost every industry is regulated now, but the ones that aren't, like, let's just say, regulation will still impact those companies eventually. It will come. Like once you get to a certain size, there's antitrust implications. There's all kinds of things that matter, and those things are relevant in DC. So
yeah, DC is the world stage. Like world leaders come here, CEOs come here, and if you're important and you're doing something of in purpose, like you're going to come to Washington DC to be on the world stage. And then I think specifically for founders, like it's important to frame your mission and make sure that it actually like aligns with the mission of whoever it is or whatever it is within the federal government. And then you can start to actually tactically map out, like, what does the outreach strategy look like? How do you start to influence the requirements? How do you start to secure like policy backing? How do you actually like land a pilot and then start saying OTA all over and over again, and then maintain that momentum into something bigger and like play the soft lobbying game? But that was a total tangent. Yes, I agree. DC is the world stage, most powerful, most important city in the world. Like, if you're doing something of consequence, you will be spending time here, whether you like it or not.
Yes, exactly. Cool. I'm going to switch to the last part of our episode today, and I've got a couple questions for you related to this. So what do you think is the most inside baseball thing about venture that you learned after you got into the industry? Just the surprise.
I don't know. I don't necessarily know if this is inside baseball, but like portfolio construction is everything, and I'm not entirely sure it gets talked about enough.
Yes, that is definitely inside baseball. I think a lot of people don't know what that is. I didn't really know what that was until I had our first fund either. Or
yeah.
I didn't really understand the importance of it or the implications of it. But do you want to talk a little bit about what you mean there?
Yeah, portfolio construction is like how you build your portfolio in terms of you have a $100 million fund, like number of companies, target ownership percentage, and ultimately like the math in terms of like how it could get returned. And I don't think enough people think about that, because fund size kind of dictates fund strategy. And sometimes I feel like there's misaligned incentives in terms of folks optimizing for fund size and fees versus other things.
Versus the actual investment thesis of the way you're investing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Okay, and what would you say is your biggest failure? And this doesn't have to be in venture, but it can be if you want. And what did you learn from it?
Getting too excited about ideas and not people. I think that's something that I learned pretty quickly in venture, is like ideas are cheap, execution is everything. Finding just exceptional people that are so intrinsically motivated that they're going to get up out of bed every single day and hustle as hard as humanly possible and wants to be sending emails and getting things done at 11:47 on a Thursday night because it's what they love to do, and they love the fact that like their competitors aren't doing those things. And I think maybe initially in my career I was really drawn to ideas and not the individuals. And then I don't know, just being underprepared. I feel like every time that I'm underprepared, I'm like, shoot, I should have done. That was not a good reflection of me or the organization or anything.
I love that's such an honest answer. Everybody does that sometimes.
Yeah.
Nobody says that.
Yeah. You can be prepared and wrong, and I think that's fine as long as you have the humility to see that. But just being underprepared stinks. Like it just makes my stomach turn.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, and then the last question is, what's the best advice you've ever received? And also could be a mentor, doesn't have to be, but
I guess I'll shout out to my parents here. They always like just constantly beat the drum of do the right thing, don't make excuses. Like, and I just feel like that's, if you live your life like that, things are, I don't know, like it's hard to feel like you won't live a fulfilled life if you're always trying to like focus on your North Star and do the right thing and not make excuses about it, and like taking ownership over everything you do, because then that kind of like translates to humility, which translates to like reflection and like consistent improvement. Yeah, I'd say that's probably like the best advice I've ever been given.
yeah, I mean, I think that's great advice because I don't know if this is what you mean by it, but in a way it's like there's this constant cycle of sort of improvement in the world that is
Yeah.
happening. And if you want to be part of that, like you're improving too. And that means you have to do things on a regular basis all the time that are the right thing to be doing to drive that forward. And it's not
Yeah.
always easy.
Yeah.
And if you live your life that way, you're probably going to accomplish a lot more than.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks, James, so much. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Awesome. Thanks, Paige.
That's a wrap.